gentlemen, welcome to today's Beyond the Tech podcast. I am Eda Maria Kaisumi, your host, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Collin Walke, a distinguished attorney specializing in data privacy, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. With over 15 years of experience, Collin leads the cybersecurity and data privacy practices at Hall Steel. His credentials include certifications such as CIPP US and CIPM, and he's also certified AI Auditor. Beyond his legal practice, Collin served 6 years in the Oklahoma House of Representatives, where he notably authored the nation's first and only opt-in data privacy law. His commitment to data governance encompasses a broad spectrum from HIPAA to GDPR compliance, and he is the frequent speaker on topics related to AI, data privacy, and cybersecurity. Welcome to the show, Collin. We are very happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here and so glad to see you again, Nita.
Thank you. Could you share your journey into the field of data privacy and cybersecurity? What motivated you to specialize in this area?
Probably wildly different than most of your guests or listeners. So I'm from Oklahoma, and in Oklahoma, we are a rural state. And so that means that we grow it, we feed it, or we pump it out of the ground. Data ain't our thing. And so it wasn't until 2019 when I read a book about how we were being exploited through data privacy, or the lack thereof, data manipulation by big tech companies. And I wanted to do something about that. And so I was fortunate to have a lot of good guides and mentors who helped write the California Privacy Act that helped me understand that. And then I wanted to actually not just know the law, but I wanted to know the tech side of things. And so I went through Harvard's business analytics program where I got to know you. And the rest of it has kind of been on the ground learning on my own. And that's, in Oklahoma, we have some tech companies, but it's not like Silicon Valley. So it's a little bit different how I got there than most people.
That's very fascinating. Everybody reads books, but not everybody get motivated to do things. So that's very inspiring, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, during your tenure in Oklahoma House of Representatives, you authored the country's first opt-in data privacy law. What challenges did you have in this legislative endeavor, and what impact has the law had on taking in force?
So I really appreciate that question because I anticipate it's going to lead into some of our conversations about AI, which is to say the biggest obstacle that we ran into all came down to dollars and cents. So the lobbyists that were opposing the legislation were talking about how once you do this, it's going to increase costs on businesses and consumers are going to lose out because they're not going to have the same type of targeted marketing and those sorts of things. And my law was different than the other laws. Every other law in the United States is what's called opt-out, and mine was opt-in. And so Facebook, the quarter after Apple went to opt-in for their App Store, Facebook said that they lost $10 billion in revenue, right? So you can see that there is a financial impact to going to opt-in. So my law passed out of the Oklahoma House by supermajorities 3 years in a row, but it died every year in the Senate. This year, however, it looks as though a version of that law is going to pass in Oklahoma. Unfortunately, instead of being opt-in, it's going to be opt-out. So it'll be like every other law in the country, which in my opinion means that it's going to be fairly weak.
Yeah, and that's quite a challenge. And I know that this cost efficiency stuff, it's always on top of the agenda. So whatever you present, the cost comes first, regardless.
That's right. Well, and the funny thing is, though, is that, lobbyists aren't inherently bad, right? There are good lobbyists, there are bad lobbyists, just like there's good lawyers and bad lawyers, right? And at the end of the day, the lobbyists, though, would just repeat, well, the California Attorney General said that when California passed its Privacy Act, it cost $55 billion. And that is not what the Attorney General said, right? But most legislators don't go back and actually look and see what did the Attorney General say. And as a result of that, lobbyists tend to inflate the costs versus what's really the costs. And so in that regard, most of the clients that I deal with on a daily basis doing data privacy, it's not that expensive. It's not that cost intensive.
Wow, impressive. Well, let's shift a little bit. With your experience in data governance, including HIPAA and GDPR compliance, how do you approach the complexities of aligning state and federal data privacy regulations? Because I know in the state it's a lot of differences between federal and state rules.
Well, it's a great question, because in the United States, we don't have a general data privacy law. You referenced HIPAA, for example. And so HIPAA is a federal law that governs only healthcare privacy in the United States, right? And it only covers healthcare privacy if you are a quote unquote covered entity. And what that essentially means is that you're a healthcare provider, a health insurance payer, or something along those lines. So if you're Fitbit, and I'm Collin Walke giving my information to Fitbit, that is not protected by HIPAA. It might be protected under certain state data privacy laws, right? California, Colorado, all of those sorts of good things. And most states, in order to pass their legislation for data privacy, have made carve-outs for any federal entity. So if you're a federal entity that has to abide by HIPAA, then you don't have to apply with California's Privacy Act. If you have to comply with banking regulations like the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, then you don't have to comply with local regulations.
Well, I think you should have a brilliant brain, Collin, to remember all this stuff. You know, one country, so many laws, and we have the whole Europe and one law.
Right, but you know, even under the EU law, that's part of the problem for me, because I can read the GDPR, right? I can read that in English, but then you've got 32 member states that all have their little tweaks, and I don't read German or French or Swiss or that's not me. And so to your point, yeah, it's easy for me because we're all talking English. But when I go look at another country, totally different story.
Absolutely, you got the point. Well, can you discuss a case or project where your intervention significantly improved an organization's data privacy posture?
Yes. So, for example, I represent several international law firms. And these international law firms are operating in South America and the EU and elsewhere. And they just really had no idea what all data they had, where it was going, what they were doing with it, and whether they were complying with any of these laws, or if they even had to comply with any of these laws, right? And so we walked them through that process, figured out the most cost-effective way to do this, which in all reality is to simply make your metrics measure up to the GDPR. And the reason I say that is because when I was trying to pass my legislation in the House of Representatives in Oklahoma, we had a group of tech companies from Oklahoma there, and we were asking them, what do you think about this law? And every one of them, all of these developers said, well, I don't know why this is an issue. We're already telling our clients to do this. It's best practices, right? And so instead of trying to, I think a lot of lawyers make the mistake of trying to make somebody's data privacy policies and procedures mirror each state in the United States. And you can't do that. And instead, if you just set the highest threshold, which is like the GDPR for all intents and purposes, then you're good and you're covered under all of the other states. So what I have found is you make entities more efficient by focusing on what's the highest level of protection that you need to comply with. And then that way you don't have to worry about anything else. There are a few tweaks here and there for some entities, but for the most part, at the end of the day, if you comply with the GDPR, you're good everywhere in the United States.
Absolutely. And I think I like your approach to find the threshold for that, because I also work with compliance with different clients, and I do the same practice for my clients.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how can AI be leveraged to promote sustainability initiative? And I bring that sustainability issue because I know that when we were in Harvard, we had a couple of discussion on this, and because that's very high topic in Europe, at least comparing to US. Are there specific projects that you've been involved in that align AI with environmental goals?
So I have not been involved with any to align to environmental goals, other than to say that I am very well aware of the fact that in Oklahoma, oil and gas companies are starting to investigate AI uses in the manner and method by which they extract oil and gas and then distribute it through the pipelines, efficiency's sake. I have not been involved any with sustainability directly, in part because in Oklahoma, sustainability is kind of a dirty word. We're a very conservative state. We like our oil and gas. That being said, I do have a client who is involved in the healthcare arena and AI. And in that particular circumstance, in Oklahoma, we have a fixed cost medical system for low income individuals. And so what that means is that I am assigned to a doctor, and for every patient that is assigned to the doctor gets $1. And the goal is that the doctor gets to keep the $1 if he doesn't refer the patient out. And if he has to refer the patient out, then he's got to share a penny with the other person that he referred him out to. And so the goal of this AI is to try and determine what's going to prevent Collin from having to go somewhere else. Can the physician prescribe something that hasn't already been prescribed, or locate something from a genetic background, et cetera, in order to improve the healthcare services that are provided and decrease that referral out so the physicians can keep more costs? So that's one of the practical uses that I've been personally involved in, but unfortunately it doesn't fall into sustainability.
But it is actually usage of AI for sustainable society, because when you have a circle of health for a physician who has been able to take care of his or her patients, I think that supports the sustainability in society. Not probably environmental, but other sustainable goals.
I will also say, and you may already know this, Nita, but I heard one interesting use case of AI talking about sustainability for large shipping ships. And that they were actually utilizing AI to control the currents that they were traveling on the sea wind and all of that, and to make it more efficient while they're traveling. And I thought that was an interesting use.
It is, absolutely. Well, we talked about European Union's AI Act that aims to regulate AI technologies comprehensively. What are your thoughts on its potential global impact, and how should your organization prepare for such regulations?
So, first of all, kudos to the EU for doing something about this, because the United States it's pretty clear that we're not going to do anything about this. About 6 months ago, people were asking me, do you think that AI will revive the data privacy fight and those sorts of things? And I said, yes. I think that once we have deep fakes, individuals or legislators are going to start figuring out they need to do something about this. And with the new Trump administration, it's pretty clear to me that that's not going to happen. And I find that unfortunate. And in fact, there's been some statements issued that they're going to start changing words that we typically use in AI, like bias. You're no longer allowed to use the word bias. Those sorts of things. And so it's very Orwellian. That being said, I think that the EU has the right mindset, which is to say that this is a very dangerous tool. And if we don't control the tool now, then there's no stopping it into the future. And that's my biggest concern, is unlike oil and gas, where we used to do horrible things with the environment and ultimately we realized the change and we fixed it and cleaned up oil and gas spills and all that good stuff, it's different with AI. And the amount of harm that can come as a result of AI usage improperly is just astronomical. And so consequently, I think they have the right idea. Unfortunately, going back to dollars and cents, I don't see the United States investing in any of that because of competition and capitalism, and they want to make every dollar they can, irrespective of the environment that they hurt, whether that's a human being or the earth itself.
Absolutely. And you know what is my fear? Because I think Europe having this AI Act, which ultimately makes us more expensive, how we can be competitive in future and compare with US and Asia and other countries, and how long does it last? And so is it going to fade out, or is it going to continue? How the implementation goes?
Yeah. And I wish that you're at least being conscious about it. Here in the United States, we're not even being conscious about our approach to this. Most of our legislators, especially at the federal level, have no idea how to understand AI, et cetera, have no idea how to regulate it. And in fact, I think that all of our data privacy laws need to go away, and we need to rethink data privacy and AI regulation from the ground up, because it's clear that the way we're doing it now isn't making any headway, and we need to reinvent that wheel to try and make some headway.
Absolutely. Okay, as a certified AI auditor, how do you define responsible and ethical AI? What frameworks or guidelines do you advocate for ensuring AI systems are developed and deployed ethically?
That's a fantastic question, because I think you have to start with the context. You can't discuss whether something is, ethical or not or responsible without appreciating the context, right? There may be very good reasons for someone to have a high biased AI system, and that's not inherently bad depending on the context, right? And so I always start from the perspective of the context. And once you've decided what that context is, the next step is to figure out, well, how are your tools potentially going to be misused? So, for example, one of my clients just recently developed an AI persona. And the AI persona is going to be playing in a space that is typically regulated for AI. Well, I say typically, there's only one law in the United States, Colorado, on AI at the moment. But most AI regulations, if you're dealing with housing, credit scores, those sorts of things, that's when AI begins to apply. And so the next question was, what's the worst thing that could be done with your program? That's the next question that I ask, is what's the worst thing that could happen? Because you can work backwards from there in order to mitigate what that potential damage is. So I like to ask clients, what keeps you up at night about your AI? Right? What is your biggest fear? Is it that it's going to generate an image of a half-naked woman? And so, for example, in the state of Washington, they have a lottery. And to promote the lottery, they said, scan this QR code, and then you can pick how you want to spend your money on a beach vacation, in a castle, or whatever. This woman clicks it, and it was a nude body with her face on it. And so that's just, generative AI. And so what keeps you up at night because in the context of trying to sell lottery tickets, that was not something they predicted or wanted, right? And so figuring out what the worst possible thing that can happen within that context. And then from there, we work backwards and we say, okay, is there a way to anonymize your data? Is there a way to change your algorithm? Are there other committees that we could put in place to oversee particular circumstances? So starting with context and then going to worst case scenario and working backwards from there.
Absolutely. I like this approach because I was talking with another person and thinking that when it comes to AI, can you afford to have your name printed with capital letters on the biggest newspaper that your company has done this and that? Can you afford it? So if so, then you're probably within the ethical context. But
what concerns me about that, though, Nita, is you're absolutely right. Are you rich enough to be able to sustain that PR hit? Like that's the gist of what you're saying. And that's my biggest concern is that most consumers, even if Target or Walmart messes up some big way, they'll just keep using the product anyway because we're just so used to convenience. The fact that we've gotten so used to convenience is terrifying to me.
Yeah, and that's the reality. We know that.
Yeah.
Well, could you share an example where ethical consideration in AI development led to a positive outcome?
I had a client who was attempting to utilize AI. Well, it was less about the AI usage and more about the data collection. And so what they were doing is they were collecting data from certain clients and then anonymizing that data and then claiming that data as their own because now it was anonymized. And the problem there is while that's not necessarily dealing with the ethics of the AI use itself, it's dealing with the model. And I think that one of the biggest concerns I have about AI right now is how much data is just flowing out there that's being used in these models without permission, without consent, and without knowledge. That, to me, is the biggest concern. I'm hard-pressed to think of a particular circumstance in which I advised a client on an ethical use of AI that actually led to a specific change, because most of my clients, once they have a business product, they want to take it to market. They're not looking for me to tell them no. And so a lot of these individuals, because AI is the Wild West, they're like, well, we appreciate your advice, Walke, and we appreciate the warnings you've given us. We're going to run with it anyway. And that's a risk, right? I mean, that's my job as a lawyer, is to just tell you what the risks are. If you want to take that risk, that's on you, not me.
Okay, that was interesting, and I have an interesting question for you. If you're provided with unlimited resources in the world, and imagine that whatever you want to do, you can do it. So what AI-driven project would you pursue to address a significant global challenge?
Well, going back to one of the comments that we made just before we got on air, you were talking about ethical hackers, right? Like, how can you be an ethical hacker? If I had unlimited resources, I would probably run one of the scariest deep fake phishing campaigns I could possibly run on every single legislator that exists in the United States. And thanks to AI, I could probably do that fairly easily. And the reason I would do that is because right now, no legislator really feels the pain that a real individual who's been exploited from a deep fake or otherwise would feel. And until individuals feel that pain, they're not going to understand or appreciate the changes that need to be made. And so while it sounds really horrible, and also it's really not that bad if you think about it this way. John Oliver, I don't know how many of your listeners know who that is, but he has an HBO show. He's a comedian, used to be on The Daily Show and Comedy Central. And John Oliver, a few years ago, bought from data brokers a bunch of data on legislators and said, if you don't pass a data privacy law, I'm going to release all of this data. Now, I don't know whether he ever did, but the point is that threat's been made. If I had unlimited resources, I would absolutely carry out that threat, because it is time that we respect this technology. And right now, we're just sitting back and letting the tech companies do whatever the hell they want in the name of making a buck.
Well, you know what? I think we have a lot of listeners. You never know who is listening to the show, and people may contact you for your brilliant idea. So it may be an investor or a tech company. You never know. Good. Last but not least, given our initiative that I have discussed with you earlier prior to this call, together with other Harvard colleagues, we are prototyping an AI model to reduce the school shooting. What insights or recommendation can you offer to ensure such technologies are both effective and ethically sound?
That's a great question, and I think the idea is fantastic, right? I mean, identifying school shooters before they happen, getting the interventions that those individuals need for their mental health is so tremendous, and I think it's a fantastic idea. The biggest problem that you're going to run into is really on the political side of that. And so, one, you don't want to be the sheriff or school administrator who lets somebody in and gets all of this sensitive data pertaining to children. So a few years ago, Microsoft, Melinda Gates and Bill Gates had given something like $500 million donation to a school district in Washington State to try and figure out what are some mental health interventions and things like that we can do, even with the families, if we know that somebody's an alcoholic. And part of the problem is that one, they were answering all these questions on laptops that were open on their desks, and they asked questions like, do your parents fight? Do they drink? And so other children could see what was being reported. But even worse than that, the data itself was being held by a private entity, a third party. And so you've got to figure out, how am I able to ensure that this data is truly anonymized, protected, not shareable with third parties, including the other classmates in the room taking the test? But the other side of it is, and I think the biggest fear that all of us have about AI and predictive technology in the criminal justice system, is a mistaken identification. Because even if, as innocuous as it may be, that says, listen, we think that we've got some concerns about you, we'd like for you to seek these interventions, etc., somebody's life isn't necessarily altered by doing that, but as a human being, they're like, I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't going to do anything wrong. And now you're believing a computer over me. And so I think it breeds a bit of distrust. And so that's a very difficult balancing act because we know that AI can do so much good, but in the midst of that, it can do so much damage. And so it's truly just a balancing act to convince individuals to recognize how important this type of technology is in saving lives. And we make mistakes all of the time. We send innocent people to jail. Bad things happen. That's not right. That's not just. We should figure out how to fix those mistakes. But AI is going to have the same problems, and we shouldn't say don't use it just because it has problems. Human beings have a ton of problems. So, for example, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Israeli parole studies, but there was a study that was done, and it showed that if you were one of the first people up for parole in Israel before lunch, you were going to get out. If you were one of the last people up before lunch, you wouldn't. If you were up right after lunch, you'd get out. If you were right at the end of the day, you wouldn't, right? And that's because humans are lazy. After time, we get tired, we forget, we just want to move on with life. Computers don't have that laziness problem. They're going to give you the answer every single time. So there are those pros and the cons, and really what we need to have is a serious conversation. And we can't have that serious conversation until the public understands what's really going on.
Absolutely. And that's actually the point that sometimes I can't sleep, because when I think, okay, my AI model is accusing even one individual too much, then that's getting too much.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it has been an incredible, nice conversation, Collin. It was nice to catch up with you again, and especially your insight into the Data Privacy, AI Act, and so on. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I hope that people enjoyed this conversation.
I'll tune in. Thank you, Nita.
Yeah. Thank you.